I'm going to go binge on Tina Turner. All right, well, we're 4 minutes in. I'm going to kind of get us rolling here. And just get us kicked off. If people roll in, they'll easily catch up. It's no problem. So, all right, is everyone seeing that slide? Wait, no? Okay, cool.
Indeed.
All right. So today we're going to talk about going up market, and we've kind of divided this into two sections. One is what's different about enterprise, and the second is how do I get there? So first we're going to establish the case for it's actually a different territory, and then we're going to talk about, well, there's some ways to get there that are better than others. The TLDR on this is, moving up market has big upside. We're going to acknowledge that. We're going to talk about why it has upside and why it's so attractive, but it's not a casual decision. You can't just re-aim your current GTM motions at larger accounts. Like, that's not what going up market means. You're actually going to fail if you do that. So we need a new GTM motion. We're going to talk about kind of some of the characteristics of that GTM motion. And we're also going to look at kind of history, how companies have moved up into enterprise in the past, some with more success than others. There are some really expensive stories and journeys about people trying to get up market, even successfully, but spending 20 million plus in the process. And so we're going to talk about kind of what that journey looks like. And we can't erase this idea that sales cycles in enterprise are longer than they are in SMB. We can't erase it. And so, we got to deal with the timeline too. It might take some time to get into enterprise. And we think there are some smarter ways to do that than others. So we're going to cover all of that. Just to get us started here, in the chat, if you would just type in what percentage of your business do you think will be enterprise business this year? And you can define that however you define it in your own company. If it's deal size, it might be everything over 50K US. If it's based on company size, then you probably have a way of segmenting your companies. But what percentage of your business do you expect to be enterprise this year? Everything from 0 to 100 is welcome. Okay, we're coming in.
15, 25, 25, 20, 35% from Brian. Sean with 45%. Roll off 30%.
Perfect. Okay, cool. So I didn't see any zeros. It looks like everyone's at least got their toe in the water. If you're zero, type it in so we know. But nobody's majority enterprise here, which is why you're on this call. Amazing. Okay, so let's talk, or why don't another thing that I would like you to put in the chat. What is the hardest thing about enterprise? And that's just going to get us rolling. Then I'm going to hand it off to Owen, and we're going to go through some slides on how is enterprise different. But what is the hardest thing that you've noticed? We've got everybody here's got some experience in enterprise. What's the hardest thing about enterprise? And I don't mind if you just speak up. Stakeholder management, new logo lands. New product, like
new product. Gaining access to decision makers.
Low deal velocity. Oh my gosh, yes. It's almost like you're on a roller coaster. It's like very, very low predictability, or at least lumpiness, stretching everything out. Okay, so we're going to have a great conversation today. Let me hand this off to you, Owen, and you can just tell me when to advance. And
sure.
And we'll talk about how's enterprise different.
I think you're still spotlighted on the right, just so you know.
Oh, let me
Great.
unspotlight. Wait, I think I need to be spotlighted, right? So that you'll see my slide.
Okay, that's fine then. So the question here is, how is enterprise different? You know, we all know kind of when we start to dip our toes into enterprise that we're entering into a different territory. And so let's just put a first and last name on this. Like, what is it actually about enterprise that's different? So let's jump to the next slide, if you will, Dave. We think that there's a few key things that are different. First of all, from a product perspective, you start to need enterprise features, right? Your product actually has to transform. Second, the buying process changes because you're no longer selling to a person or a small group of people or one person that's empowered. You're now selling to an organism that has its own way of responding to the need to purchase products and services, right? So longer sales cycles, more stakeholders involved. We'll go into some more details around the buying process changes. Also, the procurement process changes. You know, you now have an actor with power that you haven't encountered in smaller organizations. And so there's some serious considerations in terms of how do you prepare your organization, your enablement materials, your sellers to be able to address that. And then finally, there's the emerging importance of FOMO more so than FOMO. So we all know FOMO, fear of missing out. Now we're talking about fear of messing up, right? So we'll dive into each one of these in sequence. Please feel free to pop comments, chat, questions into the chat as we go. So let's jump on to the next one. So we all know this, right? Like we have a number of customers that we worked with where they've spun up an entire enterprise team. They put a bunch of money into it. And then you look into the data and you realize that the larger their ACV gets, the lower their win rates become, which is counter to what we see typically. And when you look at the loss reasons, they're all feature functionality related, right? They don't necessarily have the maturity to serve the types of organizations that they're attempting to sell into. So you can imagine it at a PLG, so call it sub 5K deal for a lot of folks level. You're really just selling at a user feature level. Maybe there's some collaboration or team features. When you get into the SMB segment and definitely up into mid-market, now you have larger teams that need to work around your tool. You have to have management features. You have to have reporting so they can track the investment that they've made in you. You need to have interoperability with standard platforms because at that point, you know, they're probably a Google shop or a Microsoft shop or whatever it might be, and have other key platforms that they use. It's a serious part of their business you need to integrate. And then, of course, when you get into enterprises, especially for public companies, right, they have all types of other technical requirements and product requirements related to security and risk. So we're talking about, you know, InfoSec. We're talking about different security features, SOC 2, pen test, redundancy. And these are things that you can run into a brick wall, right, at a certain point. You might be able to work your way in around the edges, but at a certain point, you really need to have your product at least working in the direction that's going to function for those larger organizations. And this can vary, you know, industry to industry, exactly what that looks like. Let's jump on to the next slide. Another one is the enterprise buying process, right? I think the most effective way to think about this is that you are no longer selling to an empowered person. You're selling to an organism, and that organism has to protect itself from the follies of the errors in decision making that can be committed by an individual, right? So because of that, you have way more stakeholders involved with unique roles. It's going to take you longer because each of them has something that they need to review. So we're talking 6 to 9 month sales cycles on average. They can go beyond that for more complex products. Because of that, you have the need to do mutual action planning, right? So actually project managing across the different individuals on the buyer side. You need to have a really strong internal champion who has a pain that they're trying to solve, the power to solve it, and the vision, right? To be able to bring the whole team together around that. But there's going to be politics. There's folks who had another product in mind, folks that are happy with the way they're doing things right now, folks that are, in territory battles between one another. You also have executives that are going to be asked to allocate some of their budget, or they know that if money's spent on your product or service, there's not going to be as much money left over for them to argue for in the budgeting process, right? So you have to be kind of aware of that, know how to navigate that, understand where the approval authority is. And then also another big one here is deep product and use case review, right? So we're talking about these deep technical reviews. You're no longer going to put somebody on a trial and a week later go, hey, so ready to roll? It's much more of a conversation of how do we map our buying criteria to the technical aspects of your product to be able to ensure that everything is going to deliver the value that we need. So I know this is a lot of information. I think that the short version here is it becomes way more complex because you're selling to an organism, not a person. And so let's take at least a couple of deep dives here. If we can go to the next slide, Dave. So let's think about the buying process and decision team complexity. We said it's not one person, it's multiple roles. Like, what are some of these roles? Well, you might have an initiator. That's the one that feels the problem because it relates to their day-to-day work. And they're out there kind of researching and they say, hey, there might be a better way to do this. Usually they're communicating with the champion. The champion is someone who has a real need, like this can really help them. And they're in a position to advocate for it. Now, a champion might not be a decision maker, right? Because a champion might be able to benefit from what you're doing for them, but a decision maker has the authority to be able to prioritize between different needs that the business has and determine how big of a priority your offering is and how it fits into that prioritization. So decision makers oftentimes run into gatekeepers because decision makers can make mistakes. And so larger organizations need gatekeepers in any number of different forms for technical review, legal, security, CFO, increasingly involved in a lot of the deals that we're seeing, right? So these folks are involved to make sure that you don't make a mistake, right? And so the decision maker has to be able to leverage an influencer, somebody who has the trust of the gatekeeper, but more bandwidth probably than the gatekeeper does, to help them understand that this actually is going to be an okay decision to make. And then, of course, you have executive buyers who are tied into the end of the process there, right? So you have all these different players. You need to think about how you might leverage an initiator to get to a champion to get to a decision maker. You need to think about how the decision maker can leverage an influencer to get through the gatekeeper. You need to understand what the gatekeeper's complaints and concerns are. And you're kind of in the middle of this, helping to orchestrate this whole process, right? So I think this is one example. Let's jump to through the next couple slides quickly here. Another one, you're going to need to build a mutual action plan when you get into much larger accounts because there's a lot of boxes that need to be checked, seller requirements, buyer requirements, and there's dependencies between them. And so you actually need to map this out and help your champion to buy the product. Because even though they may have never gone through a process like this before, they may have gone through a process like this, but for a different product. And so they don't understand what the requirements are and how to go through that. So you actually need to have a system to guide them through that. And then finally, one more example of something to consider here is, putting together a real proof of concept, right? So again, this isn't the week-long trial and then let's make a decision. It's a few steps away from that, right? We need to understand where the impact needs to be achieved for your organization, how that matches with budget, your decision criteria, which stakeholders are gonna have place more or less importance on which decision criteria. And then we actually need to put into place a proof of concept exercise that simultaneously satisfies the technical stakeholders and the business stakeholders, because they are not going to know how the impact that they're looking to achieve at a business level relates directly to feature functionality, security, everything else. because they've never bought a product like this before me. So, right. So you have to help them map that out and then help them prove that it's going to work for them before communicating back to the executive audience. So again, I know this is pretty, like each of these examples go pretty in depth, but it's just to show that across all elements of the process, the fact that you're selling to a much larger organization requires that you go way deeper. And if we go to the next slide quickly, the same thing happens with the procurement process, right? InfoSec in and of itself can be, a situation where you don't want to come with a knife to a gunfight, right? I mean, your Q&A doc isn't necessarily going to do it as you move up market in the same way. Just like you might have to prepare for, RFIs, RFPs with a greater level of depth and preparation. So, multiple vendors, approved vendors, vendors of choice. There's all types of things that we need to be thinking about here. I think in summary, what we want to get across in running through some of this is that, it's just going to be way more complex. So if we jump to the next slide, I'll make one last point. Everybody knows the saying, nobody gets fired for buying IBM. What is that all about? Let's jump to the next slide and think about that, right? This is really about the importance of fear of messing up over fear of missing out, or errors of commission versus errors of omission, right? So historically, you can use FOMO as a sales tactic. You don't want to miss out on this. What happens if you don't get the impact from what we're offering you, 6 months down the line, a year down the line. Whereas what we're really seeing, and if any of you have read The Jolt Effect, which talks about indecision in the buying process and its impact on win rates and sales cycles, especially as you move up market, highly recommend you look into that book. It's really powerful, based off of a load of research. Same authors as a Challenger sale. FOMO, fear of messing up, is becoming increasingly more important, right? So errors of commission. And you can see how the further you get away from being the founder of the company and owner of the company, having a big equity stake, and more towards being a player within a much larger team, the error of commission becomes much more important. You do not want to be the guy who makes calls the shot to spend, $100,000, $200,000, up to $1 million on something that doesn't work, right? And so even though you have really decent reason to believe, based off of all the ROI calculations that were done, the business case that was put together, et cetera, that this is going to work, in some cases, it actually behooves you more to still play it safe and not advocate for the purchase of a product, right? Because you can save your career that way, right? Nobody's going to fire you for having gone with the safe option, right? Nobody gets fired for hiring IBM. So with that, I want to pause, see if we have any kind of questions here on these key elements that we see as distinguishing the enterprise sale before we hand it back to Dave and get into the real meat of the conversation.
So everyone here's dipped their toe in the water for enterprise. What have you run into? Which of these things are resonating with you?
I mean, I think for us, we're an accounting automation software, so it's fairly technical in terms of integrating with ERPs.
Yep.
And so, there are a lot of stakeholders. Talk about InfoSec and procurement, and then certainly getting IT buy-in on setting up integrations. And we find it's fairly easy to get the accounting to be bought in on the overall value of the platform, and then not that we don't eventually end up navigating those kind of later stage steps with procurement and IT, et cetera, but we have had to become much more disciplined on having materials built out on walking through exactly what our integration options look like, executing calls with IT effectively, being able to turn around InfoSec questionnaires quickly. So all of those sort of mechanical aspects of the sale, we've had to get much more disciplined in sort of how we execute on. So we've made progress on that side, but from where we were like a year ago to where we are today, like those were slowing us down dramatically. And now we've started to compress the sales cycle more, but we're still looking for more opportunities to do so.
That's so interesting. I often see it flipped, especially we're going to talk about how you get to enterprise, but especially if you bring enterprise leaders in, they've got the infosec and procurement thing down, but they might have trouble getting business sponsorship because they don't know the product well enough. Sounds like you're getting business sponsorship, but the kind of running the gauntlet at the back half where you're trying to get approvals and approve vendor status and infosec clearance and technical clearance is a set of plays that you're refining right now.
Yeah, and I think we've made progress on it. I mean, before I joined the Gabify, the organization I'm at now, I was at Gartner, so it was a very non-technical product in terms of like not needing integration, not
Yep.
having infosec review or anything like that. So was like very comfortable with navigating the mechanics of the sale with the business, but probably just didn't have as many steps on the back end from an IT perspective. So that's been a learning experience.
What do you mean I'm half done with my sales cycle?
Yeah,
You
exactly.
said yes.
Yeah, we always had procurement, but not the technical stuff has just required a level of discipline because we touch the ERP and it's, financial data. They look at it pretty closely.
Amazing. Anyone else have
Dean has a comment here. He says, we're developed to be PLG and SMB, but want to be enterprise, but complexity is daunting and proving stable is tough.
Oh yeah, and Dean's camera and mic aren't working. He texted us that in the beginning. That's an interesting use case. We're going to talk a little bit about how you get from PLG and SMB up into enterprise. Stability that's a technical issue we're not going to get into. It probably should have been in the enterprise feature section, but sometimes re-architecting is required. But complexity of the orgs, we're definitely going to take that head on. Amazing. Okay. All right, let's get to the other view.
It's you.
Now I have to do this. Boom. Share.
Well, we can see the screen there.
You can see my screen now?
Yeah, we can see the slide.
Okay, perfect. All right, so everything's good. All right. So historically, when people have had to deal with the things that you guys were talking about, moving up market, we've seen some smarter ways and some dumber ways. Historically, it's felt a little bit like, a bad path and another bad path, but they're the only path. So like, think about one path as being path A. I'm going to go pick a big customer who is going to be willing to take this journey with me and show me what's needed to serve them in the enterprise space. So I'm going to identify a champion. Jeffrey Moore used to talk about those as innovators. Someone who's willing to take the product as is, so like Dean, the product that you've got, and then work with you to get it ready for enterprise. And then once we're successful with that, they generally promise referenceability, and then we're going to go roll up the rest of the enterprise accounts together. Innovators are, courageous in that way. Siebel bragged about doing business that way. ProfitLogic, a company I helped build and sell to Oracle, we certainly did it that way. Our anchor customer was JCPenney, and then take you into market. Or so that's like hand the keys off to a large customer. The other option was hand the keys off to an enterprise leader, like bring an enterprise leader in who's got a playbook, who's got the right resume, who's worked at the right places. They might have been at SAP or Oracle or PeopleSoft or Workday, and they know how to do this. So then let them hire their team, let them bring in their process, and then wait for that machine to pay off. Salesforce certainly did that. In the early days, they were selling small. Then they brought in a guy named Jim Steele, who knew from IBM, who knew how to do this. Domo certainly did that. Inside Sales certainly did that. And there's a whole list of people who go up market by hiring the right leader and then letting that leader bring you into the market. There are some issues with both. You're probably already coming up with why you don't like one or the other, starting with hand the keys off. That's a really uncomfortable phrase. If we go down the development partner route, that's weird. Switched on share and it didn't switch on my screen. Okay, if we go down the development partner route, that's a $10 million all or nothing bet. So the bet is that the customer that you picked is going to lead you to the right place. Like when you come out, whatever time frame you thought it was going to take to build your product to their specs, it's going to take you double, maybe 4 times as long. You just count on that. But let's assume that eventual success. And when I come out of that, have I built for that customer or have I built for the market? Will I have a product that's ready to sell, or will there be another big customer that has a different set of large requirements, and then a third customer that has a different set of large requirements? Will I get that right? Let's assume I do get that right. It probably won't get it right as fast as I thought I would, but I get it right, and I eventually am able to add sales to it. I'm eventually able to sell to customer 2 and customer 3. The issue is about velocity. And you see that in this 5-year plan, these numbers are all made up, but they're directionally correct. You know, I'm approaching $4 million because I had to spend the first 2 years really going all in with my anchor customer. The second path was handing the keys off to a hired gun. And by the way, the good news about this is they know what they're doing. Like, they do know how to sell, and they will get an up and to the right motion. The market used to love this. Like, as long as you've got growth, we don't care. We'll fund growth even if it's losing us money in the short term. But what a hired gun's going to do is they're going to bring in their infrastructure. Okay, first thing we need to do is hire a couple of regional vice presidents. We're going to organize regionally. They might even convince you to set up, you know, another geography, like, hey, we're in the US, we're going to set up Europe right away, because how could you be an enterprise company without a presence in Europe? They'll make arguments like that. We need to have systems engineers or sales engineers. We need to have ops and enablement. How could you be an enterprise company that doesn't know how to work with the big integrators? So we're going to have a channels organization, and it might just be 1 or 2 people, but it adds up. So the other thing they're going to do is build a capacity model. They're going to say, well, you want me to hit $15 million in ARR, I'm going to have to build $15 million worth of capacity. And they're very smart. They know that that capacity is not going to be productive in year 1. So you're going to be carrying $15 million worth of capacity, or whatever your number is, for a year before they're going to get to productivity over what, you know, they talk about as a ramp period. What they're not going to know is that half of those reps will never get to productivity. And the reason they don't know that is because they came from somewhere where the product was already there, and the product marketing was already there, the configurable demo was already there, the sales engineers were already there, the channels organization was already there. And so in order to hit my quota, I just needed to run the play. But now they're starting it from scratch, and some reps can't function without that infrastructure in place. So not only am I going to take a year to ramp, but half of my reps aren't going to ramp. And the other thing to know is you hand off the keys to a powerful enterprise leader, and your company is the center of gravity is going to start to shift. Cultural center of gravity is going to start to shift towards her and her kind of her way of doing business. The other, this is not trending towards profitability. As I sell these customers and then learn what we didn't have, and then learn what we didn't have, and then learn what we didn't have, you know, we're selling big deals and we're helping reps take home quotas, but we're also stacking up requirements on our product organization. So not only are we growing our sales organization a year in advance of when I need to see that quota hit or that ARR hit, but we're also signing up our product organization for a roadmap against these large products. So then the question is, all right, I don't like those. I don't like the option of handing off the keys to a big customer. I don't like the option of handing off the keys to an enterprise leader. Both of those looked not good. What if I could build an enterprise business that doesn't lose money? How's that for an idea? Like, what if I could do that? And what if I could build from our strengths, the ones that got us to where we are, versus jumping straight into our weaknesses, all the complexity that Owen pointed out that we may not, may not know what we're getting into. It's certainly not our strong suit. It's not where we come from. What if I could build from my strength instead of jumping right into the deep end? And what if I could maintain control of my own destiny instead of handing off the keys? Remember, none of this stuff goes away. We still need enterprise features. We still have a buying process that's 6 to 9 months. We still have a fear of messing up culture within these enterprises. And we still have a procurement process to deal with on the back end, as Brian was pointing out. You're halfway done with the sales cycle when you get your business users committed. So none of that changes. So what if we could build a version of this that's more attractive? Turns out in recent years, we've seen some of that. Dean, you were talking about being built from PLG up. 2 of these examples down here were built from PLG up. HubSpot was not. They added PLG later. But they all are good at enterprise. And the playbook that these and other companies have used, we could list a long list of companies who've gone from mid-market up into enterprise successfully without digging a $20 million hole, is, one, instead of building all the enterprise features up front, I add enterprise features slowly and just in time, just as I need them for the next contract. But I'll turn down customers who need more than I have, so I'm not forward committing my roadmap. Flip side of that same coin, number 2, what if instead of trying to sell enterprise customers wall to wall, like I'm going to go take down this entire customer, what if I could land small departmentally? And whenever somebody wants to go too big, and I know that it's going to control me, I know that it's going to take me down path A where they're in control of my entire roadmap, I say no to them. And actually, I want to be in enterprise companies, but I want to be in enterprise companies that aren't going to bury me. So I'm going to take a small footprint. I'm going to add features as I need them to slowly get ready to take on bigger and bigger footprints, but I'm not going to run faster than I have strength. And what if instead of hiring a big gun outside revenue leader, I can take an existing leader and give her the blueprints and the playbooks that she needs to know what she's getting into when she starts engaging with these accounts. So like Brian, let's have it not be a surprise that there's a procurement process. Well, how would I ever know that? I grew up doing inside sales. We're going to teach you. Like, we're going to show you some of this so that you actually know what you're getting into. You know which battles you want to pick and which battles you don't want to pick. And you know when something's going to be too big, and you have the courage to pull out of a deal that's too big and give it to someone else. HubSpot's first sales leader had never had a sales job before. It took them all the way through IPO. Atlassian's first sales leader had never had a sales job before. Had other roles in the company, ops jobs, CS, corporate development, had never had a sales role before. Lucid's first CRO never had a sales role before. So this is possible. It is possible to play your own game and not turn over the keys to a big revenue leader, as long as you give them the tools and as long as you play by some rules that you know are not going to bury you. So if we go down this path, there's some interesting characteristics of this path. We're just north of $5 million, not $11 million like we were on the hire a big gun outside revenue leader. But look at the shape of that. I can actually pursue profitability within 2 years and an upwardly convex revenue and profit curve because I'm being careful about how I'm investing. I'm only taking on as much as I can, and I'm being very sequential and logical about it. All 3 of the companies that we showed on the last slide did this. So I'm going to grow my leadership from the inside. I'm going to build an enterprise playbook and not leave my leadership hanging. I'm going to actually let them know what they're getting into. I'm going to use ABM to warm up targeted accounts. And if I can, Dean, self-service is a great thing to get started departmentally within a company, but it's not going to allow me to expand to that whole company. So I am going to have to develop a product-led sales motion that takes that initial self-service land and turns it into an enterprise expand. I want my AEs to do their own demos in this world. I don't want to hire a whole separate infrastructure for sales engineers. I don't want to hire a whole separate infrastructure for for partners. I want my AEs to stand on their own 2 feet, scoot around to the side of the table with the customer, look at the problem together with them, and then get into the solution with them and solve problems with them. That helps me scale way more efficiently. Then I want to pay really close attention to every deal, because not every deal is a good deal. When I'm trying to pursue this path, not every deal is a good deal. Not every big deal is a good deal. Like an enterprise leader will come in and say, 1 million is better than $500,000, and 2 million is even better than 1 million, and 3 million is even better than 2 million. And what if I could go land a $7 million deal? Wouldn't that be amazing? Well, now you're on path 1. I've done that. And you are handing the keys off. If you're concentrating power with 1 or 2 customers because you sign a big deal, everyone's going to be happy for about 5 minutes, and then you're going to have indigestion. So we need to know which ones we want and which ones we don't. And it may not be about size. It might be about requirements or features. It might be about how the deal is set up. It's an RFP and we're number 6 on the consideration list. So we're just there for column fodder, as they say. I don't want to play that game. I don't need to. I can keep moving. Because what my goal is to land and expand. No mega deals at first. And I'm aiming to get this thing profitable on a return on sales expense basis. So one thing to remember here is when we go enterprise, let's assume, and everyone on the call is, between 5 and 45% enterprise. When we go enterprise, if we started somewhere else and we're going up market, we're adding another go-to-market motion. We're adding one. We went through all the work to figure out how to optimize our SMB motion, do more of what works, do less of what doesn't, take variability out of it, put predictability into it, and figure out not only product market fit, but go-to-market fit for our SMB motion. Now we want to circle around and add enterprise. We're going to have to go back to the beginning and do that again. We're going to have to figure out what is going to work here for us and what is not. And not everything that we try is going to be perfect. So like, Brian, you mentioned we're getting better at it. Well, getting better at it is because I'm giving myself a chance to figure out what's working and what's not. I'm giving myself a chance to figure out how to shore up where I need shoring up and kill things that I think aren't working. That can take you some time. The cool thing is, though, when I get that second GTM working, it is different in some really powerful ways than SMB. Because when I land in enterprise, there is a big expand available to me. If I land small in enterprise, there's a lot of territory left for me to take in that account. Whereas when I land in SMB, there might be nothing left or just a little bit left in that account. So SMB tends to be more transactional, whereas enterprise tends to be more strategic, and you can get compound growth that can really accelerate your growth if you do enterprise right. Landing small, helping them succeed, running those plays that Owen talked about to go run the gauntlet of InfoSec and technical review and legal review, and proving out that case, and then going and then expanding one account at a time, but not faster than I have strength. That layered on top of a successful SMB motion can really build compound growth into your growth journey. Let me pause there for a second. Any questions or comments on what we've talked about so far? I'm going to go back to this slide. Any questions or challenges or double clicks on this? All right, I see Dean. We're developed. Oh, no, that's old. Sorry. Okay. Oh, very active in the chat. I can't catch up. Oh, and what do we got? Anything we should be responding to, or we have the chat?
Not specifically on this last section.
Okay.
I think one question here that was brought up earlier that maybe we can talk a little bit more about is, what is that journey from a PLG motion? Are there some additional aspects of how that, like how you can transition from PLG or use that to leverage your enterprise motion?
Yeah, We didn't show those blueprints, but we do have blueprints for that as well. I mean, the basic notion is that it's not an either. You don't want to treat it as an either or. So it is possible to land in an enterprise account with a PLG motion. You can't land big. You probably can't even land officially, but you can land with a user base that's trying to get a job done. When my friend Dan Cook, who was the CRO of Lucid, first took on that role, his first sales call was to someone who already had 50 users using the product. And he said, I don't know if you know that there are 50 users using our product to build out flowcharts and designs. And the person on the other end didn't know that. And then he said, can I tell you what they're using it for? And can I help you get more value out of it? And it was almost a one call close. Then he was like, wait a second, do we have more of these? We have more of these accounts that are already succeeding on the product? Like, that's way better than selling cold. And so that's called product-led sales. And what it means is the product is going to do the initial work, just like it's been doing in SMB, of helping your customers be successful. And then based on signal from the product and based on firmographic information about where your product is landing, you're going to turn something into what's called a product qualified lead instead of a marketing qualified lead, or product qualified account. And then you're going to go in as a sales team with the same conversation that we just talked about with Dan, where you're going to go find out who those users are and what they're using it for, develop a narrative, and then you're going to go looking for a decision maker the same way you would in a sales effort. And you're going to have something to tell that decision maker that she didn't already know, because you actually did your homework and you actually got your product already in there. It's already creating value and you've talked to some users. And so now the conversation is not a cold conversation, it's an informative conversation, and you go run the rest of that enterprise play. That's a short explanation of product-led sales. Was that helpful, or whoever asked that? Any follow-ups on that? Cool.
See where we're at. Yeah. And part of the challenge there becomes, like, you can have the orchestrated use cases where you're identifying in the background from the data where certain types of users are doing certain types of activities, and there's an opportunity to thread in a different type of stakeholder into the conversation. There's also ones that are, how do we take folks from the existing sales process that we know are from a larger organization, and alert ourselves to that while they're on the way in the door, so that we can put a salesperson on that particular conversation because the upside is greater. So I think there's a little bit of a scanning that has to be done to say, all right, well, where are the actual opportunities for us to interject with sales presence? And then what are the motions around each of those? What are the talk tracks? What are the process? What's the journey that we take them down? And oftentimes, we'll work with a company and see that when you look under the hood at what some of their best performing sellers are doing, they've already figured this out. It's like, well, everyone's conversion rates are the same. How is this person selling 4 times as much as everybody else? Where are all those leads coming from? Yeah, he's figured out how to determine from the data where there's opportunities to thread to larger purchases. Dean says, and for context, we are late beta or early entry to market in a very niche space. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that is, and I know, Dean, you said you were developing a new product, so I don't know if late beta is your existing SMB market or late beta is for this new product in the new market. It kind of matters, and would love to debate that out when you have a microphone and camera. So the thing to keep in mind here is enterprise is not black magic. There are some who you would interview for a potential sales leadership role who might lead you to believe otherwise. hey, this is the domain of black magic. I got you. You know, you haven't been here. I have. Let me show you how it's done. And then all of a sudden, you know, you feel uncomfortable about all the stuff you can't see anymore and all the machinery that was working for you on a reliable basis that you really, really worked hard um, to get working for you. All of this stuff um, all of a sudden becomes invisible to you because it's, you know, quote unquote black magic. It's not. It's not black magic. You just have to know what to measure and you have to treat it like an experiment and a scientific pursuit, just like you did when you were building SMB, and not hand the keys off. So what that means is ARR in and of itself is not the number one metric. If it were, then that single $10 million deal would let us all go home.
Mm-hmm.
What we know is that single $10 million deal is just the beginning of what I owe
Yeah.
to that customer. And it might actually distract me from even getting a second deal.
I think Sean put a comment in the chat that is somewhat related to this. He says, please tell us more about how to get the initial land done in an enterprise account and how to get stakeholder group buy-in. Are we selling the product or are we selling a paid POC to prove out the stakeholder group's requirements?
Amazing. Well, so Sean, it depends if we're PLG or we are sales led. I'm going to assume we're sales led and we know how to sell into. Oh, is that Sean that just came back on camera? Amazing. Hello. So PLG or sales led in your existing business?
Sales led.
Okay. So my experience is don't ask your salespeople to change who they are. Actually let them develop empathy for a champion, a departmental champion within an enterprise account, and let them go do what they do. Let them do their own demo. Let them develop their understanding of situation, pain, and impact at the departmental level. Let them scoot around to the same side of the table and work together with their champion, even if they're only pursuing a $12,000 deal. Sometimes what happens is we bring a big enterprise leader in and we say, no, we don't do $12,000 deals. Like, I don't roll out of bed for less than $1 million. So then that person starts to doubt herself that she's working on the wrong deal. Well, but it's at Delta Airlines. It's a $12,000 deal at Delta Airlines. Like, let them run that play. If you hire really big quota carriers, they won't do that. They won't roll out of bed, quote unquote, for less than $1 million. But if you use your existing reps and let them continue to do what they do while providing them some air cover on the stuff that's going to be in the back half of the sales cycle, like procurement and InfoSec and all that stuff, just let them do it. Let them close the $12,000 deal. Let them close the $24,000 deal. Let them close the $90,000 deal. Those sometimes are unwelcome in an enterprise culture, but they're really welcome in this strategy. Because once I do that, as long as I'm confident that I'm going to be able to succeed, I got all the rest of Delta Airlines available to me. And I may need to roll in a layer of management to help that rep navigate to the big deal. But in the beginning, I don't need that. I just need her to do what she does. Does that resonate, Sean?
Yeah, that totally resonates. It's super helpful. And I think, as you correctly called out, there's a lot of pressure when you bring in enterprise reps to have that big deal, which complicates the whole process in my experience, and oftentimes just results in trying to get that big land and you're not landing at all. So that's a core challenge, I think, that you point out there.
These are tough political battles too, because if you do have an enterprise organization, then they say, no, Delta Airlines is mine. Like, hands off. What do you mean hands off? You're not doing anything with Delta Airlines. Well, yeah, because they only wanted to do a $12,000 deal. Okay, so meanwhile, we're going to do nothing? So those are like political battles, but that motion that you run is valid, and a PLG motion is valid in enterprise accounts. You just got to allow yourself to do it and then know which game you're playing at which stage of developing that account. So we're going to change our mindset in terms of metrics to think about velocity and pace. And that is not that much different than how we thought about developing our SMB motion. So instead of saying, deal size or even total ARR is the North Star metric, we're going to say we want consistency across the funnel, new MQLs or PQLs, number of new deals, not size of deals, number of deals. Am I consistently getting deals in? This helps me with that lumpiness factor that we talked about at the beginning. If I can get consistent lands within large accounts, I've got a lot to work with. I need to know that I have product fit, which means that in enterprise, which means my renewals also have to come in consistently, and I have to be consistently expanding. That tells me that what I'm doing is working. If it's not yet, then I may have some more work to do on my enterprise features or something that I didn't know about, going into enterprise that, I'm gonna have to work on with the product. And I don't want to add a ton of reps until I have that figured out. But if I can get my renewals and expansions working, I'm in good shape. And then I will measure, this is the one that's going to be measured in ARR. I will measure net revenue retention. I should have a very good net revenue retention number if I'm doing enterprise right. Landing small, succeeding, and then expanding on a dollar basis. It's give me an NRR that I like. Well, in our thank you guys so much for spending this time with us and engaging and having this interesting conversation. As we wrap up, just to remind you, moving up market does have a big upside, but it's not casual. We're not just going to re-aim what we do up market, although, Brian, we kind of are. I think Brian may have had a drop. We kind of are in the beginning. We just need to know that there are some other games that are going to have to be played after the initial land in order to reach the full potential of that account. Historical moves have been expensive, and it does take a while to sell, but there are smarter ways to do this. So guys, thank you so much for joining us, and we'll see you out there in the market.